The topic is Dr. Martin Luther King at the 21st century, and of course the guest is Dr. LBaldwin from Vanderbilt University. Dr. Baldwin, during this last segment, let's give you an opportunity to sort of inform our audience in terms of some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of Dr. Martin Luther King and how Dr. King, the role that Dr. King has played in what we're doing here today.
Okay. One of the things that disturbed me today is that we have this tremendous tendency to celebrate the dreamer, the person of Dr. King, who he was. But we don't want to celebrate and affirm and pursue the fulfillment of his dream.
Okay.
And I think that becomes very problematic for me. Not only is that a problem, there's also the problem of certain factions in our society trying to claim ownership to Dr. King's dream.
Very good.
I've heard people on the religious and political right use Dr. King in their efforts to promote what they call a pro-life culture, that is against abortion. I've heard people on the religious right use Dr. King against the gay rights movement. They are trying to use Dr. King to promote conservative causes. But you never hear anything about race, you never hear anything about economics, you never hear anything about peace. So they have a very limited perspective on Dr. King. I think there's the need today to recapture a sense of who Dr. King was, what his dream was about, and the kinds of tactics and methods he employed in the pursuit of that dream, and of the fulfillment of that particular dream. So the problem today, I think, adds up to a distortion of what Dr. King was, what he was about. And in many cases, we are too prone to celebrate the dreamer without celebrating the dream.
You know, Dr. Baldwin, what we always try to do is to have our guests to say something that would be beneficial to the young people, because of course not only would it be beneficial to the young people but older people as well. But I think that you would admit that we're having a real problem in terms of dealing with our young people and having them to focus on some of the things that are important, etc. Certainly Dr. King would have some attitudes in reference to these pants, the way people dress, and etc. and etc. And so, well, why don't you speak, you know,
what would be his message today?
His message to young people today in terms of what they have to do.
I think one aspect of his message would be study hard. Dr. King was an intellectual. You may think of him as an activist, a civil rights leader. He was all of that, but he was also an intellectual who took the academic life very seriously. And in his own speeches and letters to students, he encouraged them to study hard. That's one thing he encouraged them to do. Secondly, to avoid too much obsession with materialistic values.
Very good.
Because our young people are concerned about materialism. The price of clothes, the price of our sneakers, expensive clothes, expensive jewelry, that kind of thing. Dr. King was not about that. He said that materialism shouldn't be very, very important in our lives. We all have things, we all want to own things, but spiritual values are much more important. Moral values are much more important. We have to learn how to live in relationship to our fellow men and women. We have to learn how to make contributions not to just the uplift of ourselves, but to the uplift of all people. And we need to think in terms of the other. Dr. King often said that the first law of life is not self-preservation, it's other preservation. Yeah, we think certainly in terms of our own self-preservation, but we have to also think of others. And I think that's very, very important. And I think if he was alive today, he would focus on the need for education, the need to avoid too much of an emphasis on materialism, and the need to embrace spiritual and moral values.
And what about violence? I mean, what would
violence? I think that his message would be violence is always immoral. And I think he would say that on an interpersonal level, violence is wrong. In intergroup relations, violence is wrong. And in international relations, violence is wrong. You can't create a culture of life and a culture of peace through violence and human destruction. I think that would be his message.
You know, Dr. Baldwin,